Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My husband and I moved into this neighborhood years ago. He was a deputy, and we were happy, settling into our home and getting to know our neighbors. Life was good. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. It was just another day at work for him, a routine helicopter patrol. The news of the crash spread like wildfire. I remember collapsing when I heard, my world shattering around me. Our home became a gathering place for friends, family, and fellow officers. They were trying to support me, I know, but it felt overwhelming. It was July and the heat was unbearable. People set up shade tents outside, brought food and water. There were always at least 4 police cars parked on our street, and uniformed deputies stood guard at the front of the house. I was lost in my grief, barely able to function. That's when it happened. On the day of my husband's funeral, I received a letter from our homeowners association. They were warning me about my trash cans being visible from the road. Apparently, it was some new rule they'd come up with. I stared at that letter, my hands shaking. In the picture they'd attached, you could clearly see people gathered around, deputies in uniform standing nearby. It was like they were completely blind to what was happening. That was the last straw. I just lost it. I ripped up that letter into tiny pieces, screaming and crying. When I confronted them, I stormed into the HOA office, demanding to know what was wrong with them. The HOA representative tried to calm me down and asked what the problem was. I explained angrily about the warning I received on the day of my husband's funeral. The representative defended their actions, saying they were just following the rules and everyone had to comply. I reminded them about my husband's death and the visible police presence at my property, questioning how they could have missed it. The representative apologized for my loss but insisted that rules were rules and they couldn't make exceptions. I argued back, telling them this wasn't about exceptions, but about basic human decency. I left that office feeling even more broken and angry. But word got around quickly. The community was outraged on my behalf. A local Home Depot heard about what happened and sent a team to build a fence to hide my trash cans. It was a kind gesture, but it didn't erase the hurt. I couldn't let this go. I contacted an attorney, determined to fight back against this injustice. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to the ridiculous power these associations held over people's lives. The legal battle was tough, but we won. The Homeowners Association had a significant portion of their power stripped away. They couldn't make arbitrary rules anymore or enforce them without proper consideration of circumstances. It shouldn't have taken my tragedy to make this happen. It shouldn't take messing with a cop's widow to rein in these power-hungry associations. What about all the other people who suffer under their petty rules? What about those who can't afford to fight back? I often think about how different things might have been if the Homeowners Association had shown just a little compassion. Instead, they chose to be blind to human suffering, focused only on their precious rules. I got my justice, but it came at a terrible cost. I lost my husband, my partner, my best friend. No victory against the Homeowners Association could ever make up for that. But I hope that by standing up to them, I've made things a little better for others in our community. Maybe, just maybe, it'll make these associations think twice before they prioritize rules over people. Life goes on somehow. I'm still grieving, still adjusting to this new reality. But I'm also determined to honor my husband's memory by continuing to fight for what's right. Because that's what he would have done. And in doing so, I feel like a small part of him lives on through me. After my accident, I struggled with depression and feeling isolated. My therapist suggested I try to get out more, maybe join some community activities. That's how I ended up volunteering at the local pool as a lifeguard coordinator. I couldn't be in the water myself, but I could help organize shifts and keep an eye on things from the sidelines. It gave me a sense of purpose, you know? Anyway, that day started like any other. Kids were splashing around, parents were chatting, and I was making my rounds, checking in with the on-duty lifeguards. That's when I heard the commotion. There was this woman, let's call her Karen, shrieking at the top of her lungs. I wheeled closer to see what was going on. Turns out, a little boy had accidentally splashed her while playing in the shallow end. Now, most adults would just laugh it off or move away, right? Not Karen. Karen started yelling at the kid, calling him a brat and complaining about her expensive swimsuit. She demanded to know how much it cost, as if the child would have any idea. The poor kid looked terrified. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. The boy tried to apologize, saying he didn't mean to splash her, but Karen wasn't having it. She kept scolding him, saying sorry wasn't good enough. She even asked where his parents were, suggesting they should teach him better manners. This grown woman was berating a child over a little water. I knew I had to step in. I called out to Karen, asking her to calm down. I explained that it was just an accident and that the boy was only having fun. Karen rudely told me to mind my own business, calling me a cripple and saying it didn't concern me. I was shocked. In all my time at the pool, I'd never been spoken to like that, but I wasn't about to back down. I informed her that, as a staff member, it was indeed my business. I warned her that if she couldn't behave appropriately around children, I'd have to ask her to leave. Karen got even angrier, demanding to know if I knew who she was and insisting that I couldn't tell her what to do. I told her I didn't care who she was. I explained that this was a public pool where everyone deserved to feel safe and have fun. That's when things really went off the rails. Karen stormed over to me, her hands balled into fists. She shouted that she'd had enough of me, accusing me of thinking I was special because of my wheelchair. Before I could react, she grabbed the arms of my wheelchair and started pushing. I tried to grip the wheels, but she was too strong. The next thing I knew, I was airborne. There was a moment of weightlessness and then splash. I hit the water hard, sinking fast. Now I'm not a strong swimmer anymore, and panic set in immediately. I could hear muffled shouts and splashes above me as I struggled to reach the surface. Thankfully, one of the lifeguards dove in and pulled me up. As I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering, I saw Karen being restrained by 2 other pool-goers. The police arrived quickly. Turns out several people had recorded the whole incident on their phones. Karen was arrested on the spot, still screaming about her ruined swimsuit and threatening to sue everyone. I was shaken, but okay. The paramedics checked me out, and aside from a few bruises and swallowing some water, I was fine physically. Emotionally, though, it was a different story. I felt violated and vulnerable in a way I hadn't since my accident. When it came time for Karen's court hearing, I was nervous about facing her again. But seeing the courtroom filled with familiar faces from the pool gave me strength. I told my story, and so did many others. Karen was charged with assault, battery, and a hate crime due to targeting me because of my disability. She got a hefty fine and mandatory community service. Plus, she's banned from all public pools in the county. Well, I'm still processing everything, but I'm back at the pool, coordinating lifeguards and watching kids play. One thing's for sure, though. I may be in this chair, but I'm not powerless. Period. After dropping out of college due to financial struggles, I found myself bouncing between odd jobs until I landed this gig at a small local gym. The gym was nothing fancy, just a cozy space split into 2 areas by a big U-shaped bar. On one side we had a few benches, dumbbells, and barbells. The other side was home to various machines. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where you could hear the hum of the air conditioning over the sparse clanking of weights. That's when my buddy walked in. We go way back, all the way to high school. He's a great guy, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. But man, does he have an inflated sense of his own abilities sometimes. It's like he thinks he's Superman or something. He had recently hit a big milestone, bench pressing 100 kilograms. For a guy his size, that was pretty impressive. But today, he was trotting in like he was about to break a world record. I greeted him and asked about his plans for the day. He enthusiastically told me he was going to repeat his 100-kilo bench press, feeling particularly strong that day. I knew his capabilities pretty well. Heck, I'd spotted him enough times to know when he was pushing it too far. So, being the good friend I am, I offered to spot him. I reminded him that it's always safer to have a spotter when lifting heavy weights. He declined my offer, insisting he was feeling extra strong and didn't need a spotter. I double-checked if he was sure, telling him it was no trouble. He remained positive, confidently stating he had it under control. I tried one more time, but he was adamant. So I shrugged and went to the other side of the bar area. No point arguing with a guy who thinks he's invincible, right? I kept an ear out though. And sure enough, it wasn't long before I heard some serious grunting and puffing. Then came the moment I was half expecting, half dreading. My buddy shouted for help, clearly struggling with the weight. Now I could have rushed right over. But sometimes, a lesson needs to sink in. So I took my sweet time strolling around that U-shaped bar, whistling a little tune. When I finally reached him, there he was, pinned under the barbell, red-faced and sweating bullets. The weight was resting right on his chest, and he looked about as helpless as a turtle on its back. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. For a good 10 seconds, I just stood there, chuckling at the sight. Between laughs, I teasingly asked him how his extra strength was working out. He wheezed, pleading with me and insisting it wasn't funny. I disagreed, finding the situation hilarious. After I'd had my fill of laughter, I finally lifted the barbell off his chest. He sat up, gasping and rubbing his sternum. He thanked me, admitting he thought he was going to be crushed. I suggested that maybe next time he'd listen when someone offers to spot him. He half-heartedly agreed, claiming he'd learned his lesson. We had a good laugh about it after he caught his breath. I even treated him to a protein shake as a consolation prize. But did he really learn his lesson? Nah, not a chance. The very next week he was back, claiming he could deadlift way more than usual because he'd eaten an extra bowl of Wheaties that morning. Some people never change, I guess. But that's what makes life interesting, right? And hey, at least I'll always have a front row seat to his invincible antics. As for me, I'm still at the gym, keeping an eye out for overconfident lifters and always ready with a spot or a well-timed laugh. Because sometimes the best way to help a friend is to let them learn the hard way and then be there to pick up the barbell. When my daughter hit her teenage years, she started struggling with anxiety and depression. As a single mom, I wanted to help her however I could. That's when I stumbled upon the idea of animal therapy. Our local humane society allowed visitors to spend time with the animals, so I started taking my daughter there every week. It became our little ritual. Every Saturday afternoon, we'd head to the shelter and spend a couple of hours playing with the kittens. My daughter would light up in that room, all her worries melting away as she cuddled those tiny balls of fur. It was amazing to see the change in her. This particular Saturday started like any other. We walked into the kitten room and my daughter immediately gravitated towards a litter of black kittens in the corner. I sat down nearby, watching her with a smile on my face. A few minutes later, a man walked in with his daughter. The girl looked about 6 or 7, and from the moment she entered, I could tell she was trouble. She marched straight up to the nearest cage and yanked a kitten out by its leg. I winced, wanting to say something but hesitating. Maybe she just didn't know how to handle animals properly. The girl loudly proclaimed that the kitten was ugly, her voice filled with disgust. She tossed the kitten back into the cage and moved on to the next one. My daughter looked up, concern etched on her face. The girl picked up another kitten, this one with a healing eye injury. She exclaimed in revulsion, pointing out the kitten's injured eye and declaring it gross. She hit the kitten on the head when it swiped at her, probably trying to get away. I was getting more and more uncomfortable, but her father seemed oblivious. Finally, she spotted the only orange and white kitten in the room. This little guy was super chill, even as she grabbed him roughly. The girl excitedly called out to her father, saying she wanted this particular kitten. Her father asked if she was sure, and she emphatically confirmed her choice. She started bouncing the kitten around like a ball, and I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and walked over to the wall where all the cage cards were displayed. I quickly found the card for the orange kitten and took it out of its slot. Then I sat back down, formulating a plan. After a few more minutes of watching this girl mistreat the poor kitten, I walked up to her. I politely asked if I could have the kitten, explaining that we were adopting him. The girl glared at me, clutching the kitten tighter. She refused, insisting that the kitten was hers. Her father walked over, looking confused. He asked what was going on. I explained that we had visited the kitten earlier and even had his cage card. I apologized for the confusion. I held up the card as proof. The father looked at it, then at his daughter. The father gently told his daughter that she needed to give the kitten back, explaining that we were there first. That's when all hell broke loose. The girl started screaming and crying, holding on to the terrified kitten who was desperately trying to escape. She wailed loudly, insisting that she wanted this specific kitten and expressing her dislike for all the other kittens, calling them ugly. She carried on like this for a good 5 minutes. Her face was red, tears and snot streaming down her cheeks. The other kittens in the room were starting to get agitated, meowing in distress. Finally, her father had enough. He raised his voice, demanding that she give us the kitten right away. The girl let out one final ear-piercing shriek and then did something that made my blood run cold. She threw the kitten across the room and stomped out. My daughter, bless her heart, immediately ran to pick up the poor little guy. He was shaking but seemed unhurt. The father apologized profusely before hurrying after his daughter. We took the kitten to the front desk and started the adoption process right away. I wasn't planning on adopting that day, but there was no way I was leaving that sweet boy there after what he'd been through. Then we heard a commotion in the lobby. The girl and her father were arguing with the shelter manager. The shelter manager apologetically explained their strict policy against adopting animals to families where they've witnessed animal mistreatment. She said the girl's behavior was unacceptable. The girl shouted angrily, demanding a kitten. The father pleaded with the shelter manager, trying to excuse his daughter's behavior by saying she was just a child who didn't mean any harm. The shelter manager replied that intent doesn't matter, emphasizing that the safety and well-being of the animals are their priority. She asked them to leave. The girl threw herself on the floor, pounding her fists and feet against the linoleum. Her father, red-faced with embarrassment, scooped her up and carried her out. That was 7 years ago. Otis has been the perfect addition to our family, bringing joy and laughter into our lives every day. My daughter's mental health improved significantly with Otis around, and she is now a confident young woman in college. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.